"You can't keep running forever, Nate." His words were casual, almost teasing, but they landed in my chest like a blade. I hated that he was right. I had been running from myself, from people, from the life I thought I didn't deserve. And now, here I was, standing in the middle of a bookstore that smelled of ink and dust and old paper, staring into the eyes of the man who wouldn't let me hide. Started as a joke. At least, I told myself that's what it was. When Daniel, the owner of Whitmore Books, hired me for weekend shifts, I thought it would be a quiet escape. Hours lost in shelves and registers, with no one asking about my life. But instead of sticking to schedules and stocking lists, Daniel kept asking me one question over and over again. Not about when I could cover the register. Not about whether I had finished sorting the poetry section. No. He'd lean on the counter with that crooked grin and ask, "So, when are we going out?" I laughed the first time. Awkward. Nervous. Because he couldn't be serious. Guys like him didn't look twice at guys like me. Daniel was 32, confident in a way that felt untouchable. The kind of man who wore flannel shirts rolled up to his elbows and made it look like a goddamn magazine cover. I was 19, barely making rent, my jeans frayed at the knees, and my chest full of secrets I hadn't figured out how to live with. But Daniel didn't drop it. Week after week, between ringing up customers and unpacking boxes of used novels, he kept at it. Always light, always playful. Sometimes he'd add a wink. Sometimes he'd say it so offhandedly I wondered if he even realized the weight those words carried for me. The truth was, I wanted to say yes. Every time. I wanted to step out from behind that register, follow him into the soft evening light, and see what it felt like to be wanted openly, without shame. But wanting something doesn't erase the years of being told it's wrong. The town we lived in wasn't exactly kind to boys like me. I learned that early. Words stick. Slurs shouted in locker rooms, whispers behind my back when I didn't chase after girls the way the other guys did. I kept my head down, worked shifts, went to class, and pretended. Pretending was easier. Pretending was survival. And then there was Daniel. He wasn't afraid of anyone. He spoke with that low, steady voice, never raising it, never apologizing for existing the way he did. People respected him. Even the old men who came in just for the newspapers would nod at him like he was one of their own. And maybe that's why I couldn't understand him. Why would a man like that waste his time on someone like me? One Saturday evening, when the store was quiet and the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights, Daniel walked over to where I was reorganizing the mystery section. He leaned against the shelf, watching me with that easy patience of his. "You ever notice," he said, "how the detectives in these books always find the truth, no matter how deep it's buried?" I didn't look up. My hands froze on the spine of a novel. Yeah. So maybe life's kind of like that. No matter how much you hide, eventually, someone figures you out. I finally met his eyes then. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if he was teasing me or daring me. The thing about Daniel was that he didn't force anything. He never cornered me, never demanded. His questions always came like invitations, doors left cracked open. It was me who didn't know whether I was brave enough to walk through. Until the night I found myself doing exactly that. It was late October, the kind of night where the air bites at your skin and the leaves scatter in restless swirls. Daniel had offered to drive me home after my shift, since the buses had stopped running. I should have said no. I always said no, but maybe I was tired, or maybe I was done being afraid. In the truck, silence stretched between us, thick but not uncomfortable. The radio played something low, a song I didn't recognize. The town passed in a blur of streetlights and shadows. And then, without turning his head, Daniel asked, "Do you ever get sick of pretending?" I froze. He didn't say pretending what. He didn't have to. I opened my mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "Every damn day." When he parked in front of my apartment building, I expected him to just let me out like always. But instead, he shifted in his seat to face me fully. "Nate," he said, voice steady, eyes burning into mine. I don't care how long it takes, but I want you to know this. You don't have to pretend with me. I felt something in me break then. Not the bad kind of breaking. The kind that feels like air rushing into lungs that have been starved too long. For the first time in years, I let myself smile. Just a small one. But it was real. And maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something I'd stopped believing I could have. That was the moment I realized the man who kept asking me out wasn't joking at all. He meant it. And the real question wasn't whether Daniel would keep asking. It was whether I was finally ready to say yes. The next few days felt like I was living with a secret no one else could see. On the outside, nothing had changed. Classes, late shifts, the endless routine of homework and bills. But inside, I carried the echo of Daniel's words like a fire that wouldn't burn out. You don't have to pretend with me. I kept replaying the way he'd said it. Calm, unshaken, like it was the simplest truth in the world. No judgment, no pressure, just a door left open. And for the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to walk through that door without looking back. But fear is stubborn. It doesn't vanish overnight. At the bookstore that Saturday, Daniel was different, or maybe I was. He didn't press, didn't even joke about going out like he usually did. He just gave me space, like he could feel I wasn't ready yet. And the silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was something gentler, safer. Mid-afternoon, an older couple wandered in, gray-haired and soft-spoken, asking for gardening books. Daniel guided them to the right aisle, his voice low and kind. I watched the way he carried himself. Confident without being arrogant, warm without ever overstepping. It struck me then, he was the kind of man people leaned on without even realizing it. When the couple left, I caught myself staring. Daniel noticed, of course. He always noticed. What? He asked, smirking. Nothing, I muttered, focusing on the register. He leaned on the counter, tilting his head. You've been staring at me for a solid minute. I'll take that as a compliment. Heat rushed to my cheeks. I wasn't. You were, he said easily, cutting me off. Don't worry. I like it. He walked away before I could answer, and I stood there, heart pounding so hard I thought the whole store could hear it. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way he'd looked at me. Steady, unafraid, like he knew something I didn't. The truth was, I wanted to say yes, but saying yes meant more than just agreeing to coffee or dinner. It meant being seen. It meant admitting not just to Daniel but to myself that I wanted him, that I wanted this. And if I admitted that, what would happen when the world found out? I thought of the guys from high school, the ones who spat words like poison. I thought of my dad, who never talked about feelings but once muttered that boys these days were too soft. I thought of the way people looked when they sensed difference. Sharp, assessing like predators catching the scent of prey. Was I strong enough to face that? The next week, Daniel caught me off guard. We were restocking a shipment of used books, boxes scattered around the floor, the store smelling of cardboard and ink. I was kneeling, stacking novels in neat piles, when he crouched beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his shoulder brushing mine. You know, he said, picking up a copy of The Great Gatsby. This one's about chasing something you can never really have. I shot him a look. You're not seriously comparing me to Jay Gatsby. He grinned. Maybe a little. Except you're not chasing some rich girl across a bay. You're running from yourself. I stiffened. You don't know that. His voice softened. I do, Nate. I've been there. That made me pause. For all the confidence Daniel carried, I'd never thought about what it might have cost him. He seemed untouchable, like the kind of man who never flinched at stares or whispers, but maybe he hadn't always been that way. You? I asked quietly. He nodded. Yeah, I didn't wake up one day magically immune to caring what people thought. I fought through it. Took years. Still does some days. I swallowed hard. And how did you stop being afraid? Daniel set the book down and looked at me, his gaze steady. I didn't. I just decided not to let fear run my life. Something in me cracked open at that. Because I had spent so long letting fear dictate every move, every word, every silence. And here was a man telling me I had another choice. That evening, as we closed up shop, Daniel flipped the sign to closed and turned off the lights. The store sank into shadow, the only glow coming from the street lamp outside. I lingered near the door, clutching my backpack like a shield. He walked over, hands in his pockets, stopping just close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "Let me take you out," he said softly. Not a joke this time, not playful, just a request. My heart thundered. I wanted to say yes. Every part of me screamed yes. But my throat tightened, fear clawing its way back in. I can't," I whispered. He didn't flinch, didn't look hurt, just nodded slowly, like he understood more than I wanted him to. "Okay," he said, "but if you ever change your mind, I'll be right here." And with that, he unlocked the door, held it open for me, and didn't say another word. Walking home that night, I hated myself. Not because I said no, but because of the way my chest ached with the weight of it. Because deep down, I wanted to stop running. The turning point came sooner than I expected. A week later, I was on campus when it happened. 2 guys from one of my classes, loud, careless, the kind who thought cruelty was a sport, cornered me near the library. "Hey, Whitmore's boy," one of them sneered, mocking. "You his little pet now? Bet he keeps you around for more than just shelving books." The other laughed. "Look at him, he's blushing." Knew it. Their words hit me like punches, sharp and humiliating. I wanted to deny it, to tell them they were wrong. But the truth was they weren't. Not entirely. I shoved past them, ignoring their laughter, but their voices followed me all the way home. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking. And for the first time, I realized something. Hiding hadn't protected me. Pretending hadn't saved me. They had still seen me. They had still found ways to tear me down. So what was the point of running anymore? The next evening, I walked into the bookstore with a decision burning in my chest. Daniel was behind the counter, sorting receipts, his brow furrowed in concentration. I dropped my backpack on the floor and blurted, "Take me out." His head snapped up. "What?" "You heard me." My voice shook, but I held his gaze. "Take me out, before I change my mind." For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Not smug, not teasing, just warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Tomorrow night," he said, 7. "I'll pick you up." And just like that, the door I'd been too afraid to open swung wide. The following day was torture. Every hour dragged. Every minute stretched thin with anticipation. I couldn't focus in class, couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything but the fact that Daniel was going to show up at my door. When 7 finally came, I stood in my apartment doorway, hands stuffed into the pockets of my only decent jacket, trying not to look like I was about to throw up. Then I saw him. Daniel leaned casually against his truck, wearing that same rolled-up flannel, hair tousled by the evening breeze. But when his eyes met mine, something in them softened, like I was the only thing he saw. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready, but I wanted to try. For him. For me. He didn't take me anywhere fancy, just a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind with vinyl booths and pie specials written on chalkboards. But it was perfect, safe, uncomplicated. We talked for hours. About books, about music, about the kind of lives we wanted. And for the first time, I wasn't pretending. I wasn't filtering every word, calculating every reaction. I was just me. And Daniel listened, really listened. Every laugh, every pause, every nervous glance. I felt seen in a way I never had before. By the time he drove me home, my chest felt lighter, like I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying for years. As I stepped out of the truck, he called softly, "Nate!" I turned back. He hesitated for the first time since I'd met him. "Can I kiss you?" The world seemed to stop. My throat tightened, but I nodded. "Yeah." And then his lips were on mine, gentle, steady, patient. The kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. When we finally pulled apart, I couldn't stop smiling. Neither could he. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. But reality has sharp edges. It doesn't let you stay in soft moments forever. The following week, everything seemed brighter. I caught myself humming under my breath at the bookstore, reorganizing shelves with more energy than usual. Daniel noticed, of course. He didn't say much, but every so often I'd glance up and find him watching me, that small, private smile tugging at his lips. Yet beneath the warmth, I carried a knot of fear. What if people found out? What if someone had seen us at the diner, had guessed from the way I couldn't stop smiling when he was around? It didn't take long for those fears to materialize. 3 days later, it happened. I was behind the counter when 2 students from campus wandered in. I recognized them instantly, loud, careless, the same kind of guys who thought cruelty was free entertainment. They browsed for a while, whispering and snickering, until one of them leaned against the counter where I stood. "So, Whitmore's boy," he drawled. "You keeping the boss man warm at night now?" My stomach dropped. Heat surged to my face. "I don't know what you're talking about," I muttered, forcing myself to focus on the register. "Oh, come on." The other chimed in, laughing. "We saw you two at the diner. Real cozy, weren't you?" The first one leaned closer, voice dripping with mockery. "Bet he tips better than customers, huh?" Something in me snapped. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. But before I could speak, a shadow fell across the counter. Daniel. He had stepped out from the back room, arms crossed, his presence filling the space like a storm rolling in. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was calm but carried an edge that made the 2 guys stiffen. They exchanged a glance, suddenly less brave. "No problem," one muttered, forcing a laugh. "Just joking around." Daniel didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on them, sharp and unyielding. "This isn't the place for your jokes. If you're not here to buy something, you should leave." They mumbled excuses and shuffled toward the door. One of them shot me a look, half sneer, half pity, before they disappeared into the street. I stood frozen, my heart hammering. Shame burned in my chest, heavier than the fear. Daniel turned to me, his expression softening. "Nate, don't," I cut in, voice shaking. "Don't act like it doesn't matter." "Because it does," he said gently. That broke me. After closing, I sat on the floor in the poetry aisle, knees pulled to my chest. Daniel sat across from me, giving me space, waiting until I finally spoke. "They're right," I whispered. "Everyone's going to see it. Everyone's going to know. And when they do, they'll tear me apart." He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "They don't get to define you, Nate. They don't get to tell you who you are or who you can love." I shook my head. "Easy for you to say. You're strong. You don't care what people think." "I'm not like that." His voice softened. "You think I don't care? I've lost friends. I've had people walk out of my life because of who I am. It hurts. But hiding hurts worse. Tears pricked at my eyes. I hated crying, hated feeling so exposed. But Daniel didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He just reached across the space between us and laid his hand over mine, steady and warm. You don't have to be fearless, Nate. You just have to be willing. And for the first time, I realized maybe I didn't have to fight this battle alone. The following days blurred into a mix of sweetness and tension. When we were together, stacking books, sharing quiet jokes, sneaking glances across the counter, I felt alive, whole. But when I was outside the safety of the store, every stare felt sharper, every whisper heavier. It wasn't just strangers. It was people I knew. A girl from my literature class cornered me after lecture, her voice low but sharp. Is it true? You and Whitmore? I froze, the denial on my lips tasting bitter. She raised her eyebrows, smirking. Wow, guess everyone was right about you. The words followed me home, heavy as chains. That night, Daniel drove me back after closing. The truck rumbled softly in the quiet street, headlights slicing through the dark. I stared out the window, silent. You're pulling away from me, he said finally. I swallowed hard. I don't want to, but you're scared, he finished. I nodded. He slowed the truck, pulling over near the park. The engine hummed as he shifted to face me. Nate, listen to me. Fear doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away because you wish it to, but you get to choose what you do with it. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. And what if I'm not strong enough? His hand found mine in the dark, his thumb brushing gently across my knuckles. Then let me be strong for both of us until you are. The dam broke then. I leaned into him, tears spilling hot and unrelenting, and he held me without a word. The next morning, I woke with swollen eyes and a strange clarity. I couldn't control what people said. I couldn't erase their judgment. But maybe I could stop letting their voices drown out my own. When I walked into the bookstore that day, Daniel looked up, concern etched in his features. I crossed the floor, heart pounding, and kissed him right there behind the counter. It wasn't long, just a brief press of lips, soft and steady. But it was enough. Enough to tell him, and maybe the whole world, that I wasn't hiding anymore. When I pulled back, he stared at me, stunned. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. You're going to be okay, he said. For the first time, I believed him. But the world doesn't change overnight. The whispers didn't stop. The stares didn't fade. If anything, they grew louder. Some customers stopped coming. A few muttered under their breath when Daniel and I stood too close together. One afternoon, an older man who had been a regular slammed his newspaper onto the counter. I don't like what's going on here, he spat. This store used to be respectable. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. You're welcome to shop elsewhere. The man stormed out, and the bell above the door jingled like a gunshot. I turned to Daniel, guilt gnawing at me. They're leaving because of me. He shook his head. They're leaving because of their own ignorance. I don't want their business if it comes at the cost of who I am, or who you are. His conviction burned like fire, steady and unyielding. And standing beside him, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, pride. Still, the pressure built. My parents didn't know yet. Neither did most of the people closest to me. And with every whisper, every sideways glance, the weight of that secret grew heavier. One night, lying awake in my narrow bed, I realized I couldn't carry it much longer. If I was going to choose Daniel, really choose him, then I had to stop pretending. Not just at the bookstore, not just with him, but everywhere. The thought terrified me, but beneath the fear, a flicker of hope stirred. Because maybe, just maybe, Freedom was worth the risk. Telling strangers with sideways glances was one thing. Telling my parents, that was something else entirely. The thought sat heavy in my chest for days. Every time I picked up my phone, I thought about dialing my mom's number, then set it back down. Every time I walked past the family photos lined up on my dresser, guilt gnawed at me. Daniel didn't push. He never said, "You should tell them," or "It's time." He just stayed steady, a presence I could lean on when my courage wavered. But he knew. He always knew. One night, after a long shift, I lingered in the doorway of the bookstore while Daniel locked up. The street outside was quiet, shadows stretching long under the street lamps. My throat felt tight as I blurted, "I think I need to tell them." He paused, keys in hand, then turned to me. His eyes softened, but his voice stayed even. "Are you ready?" I swallowed hard. "No, but I don't think I ever will be." He slipped the keys into his pocket and stepped closer, close enough that the faint warmth of his hand brushed mine. "Then do it scared. And if it goes badly, I'll be right there after." That weekend, I took the bus 2 hours out of town to the house I'd grown up in. The ride felt endless, my reflection in the bus window pale and drawn. Every mile closer, my chest grew heavier. My parents' house looked the same, white siding, a porch that needed repainting, the smell of cut grass lingering in the air. Mom hugged me tight at the door, fussing about how thin I looked. Dad sat in his chair in the living room watching some late-night game. Everything familiar, safe. And yet I couldn't breathe. We had dinner, me pushing food around my plate, Mom chatting about the neighbors, Dad throwing in a dry comment here and there. Felt like I was watching it all from the outside. Finally, after the dishes were cleared, I knew I couldn't wait. "Can we talk?" My voice cracked more than I wanted. Mom frowned, setting down the dish towel. "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" Dad muted the TV, his eyes narrowing just slightly. I sat at the kitchen table, palms sweating. My heartbeat thundered so loud I thought they'd hear it. "There's something I need to tell you," I started. My voice shook, but I forced myself to go on. I'm seeing someone. His name's Daniel." Silence. The kind that stretches and stretches until it feels like it'll split you in half. Mom blinked, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. Dad's jaw clenched, the muscle ticking in his cheek. Finally, he said, "So it's true." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I've heard things," he said flatly. "People talk." But I didn't want to believe it. Mom reached for his arm, but he pulled away. Her eyes filled with tears, flicking between us. "Nate, are you sure? Maybe this is just a phase." "It's not a phase," I said quickly, the words sharper than I meant. "It's who I am." Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "I don't want to hear this." My chest tightened. "Dad." No, his voice was steel. "Not under my roof." Mom's tears spilled over then, her hands trembling. "Please don't say that. He's our son." But Dad's eyes stayed locked on me, hard and unyielding. "Not the son I raised." The words cut deep, deeper than anything those guys at school had ever said. My breath caught, my vision blurring. I pushed back from the table, my chair nearly toppling. "I didn't come here to fight," I whispered, though my voice cracked. "I came here because I wanted you to know me. All of me." Mom sobbed softly, her hands covering her face. Dad turned away, jaw set like stone. I couldn't stay. I grabbed my bag, heart pounding, and walked out the door into the cool night air. The bus ride back was a blur. My phone buzzed once, Mom's name flashing across the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. My chest felt hollow, like something vital had been carved out. When I finally stumbled off the bus, the streets of town felt colder than I remembered. My legs carried me on instinct, straight to the bookstore. It was late. The lights inside were dim, but Daniel was there, counting receipts at the counter. He looked up as the bell jingled, surprise flickering across his face. "Nate?" He stood quickly, crossing the floor. "What happened?" I couldn't speak. My throat closed, my vision blurred, and the next thing I knew I was in his arms, sobbing into his chest. He didn't ask. He didn't press. He just held me, one hand cradling the back of my head, the other wrapped tight around me. When I finally managed words, they came out broken. He said, "Not the son he raised." Daniel's hold tightened. "I'm so sorry. I thought maybe they'd try. At least Mom." My voice cracked again. But he looked at me like I wasn't even his. Daniel pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes, his own gaze fierce. "You are not less because of him. You are not broken. You are exactly who you're meant to be." Tears slid down my cheeks, but in his arms, I felt a flicker of safety, a flicker of something stronger than the rejection burning in my chest. The next few weeks were rough. Mom called a few times. I let it go to voicemail. Dad never did. The silence from him cut deeper than anger would have. But Daniel didn't let me drown in it. He took me out for drives, the windows down and music blaring, letting me scream into the wind when the weight got too heavy. He made me coffee just the way I liked it before shifts. He kissed me in the aisles when the store was empty, whispering, "You're still here. You're still you. That's enough." And slowly, painfully, I started to believe him. One evening, as we closed up, I leaned against the counter, watching him lock the register. "Why do you do it?" I asked softly. He glanced up. "Do what?" "Stay with me when it's this hard." His expression softened, his hands stilling on the receipts. He walked over, cupping my face in his hands. "Because you're worth it," he said simply. "Because love isn't about easy. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard." My chest ached, but in the best way. The kind that comes from hearing something you've always needed but never thought you'd get. We didn't solve everything overnight. My dad's silence remained a shadow. The town's whispers didn't vanish. But with Daniel, I wasn't facing it alone. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The summer air felt warmer than it should have been that morning. Maybe because I carried the weight of everything unsaid between us. The bookstore was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to finally speak. Ethan was leaning against one of the ladders, flipping through an old collection of poetry. His fingers lingered on the page as though he could feel every heartbeat hidden in those words. I thought about all the nights we had sat across from each other, coffee cooling in forgotten cups, conversations circling everything except what we truly wanted to say. I thought about the risk, the family that might not understand, the customers who might look at us differently, the town that whispered behind backs. And yet, there he was, just a few feet away, looking like the answer to a question I had been too afraid to ask. "Do you ever wonder what would happen if we stopped pretending?" I asked. He froze, the book still in his hands, his gaze lifting slowly toward me. His eyes softened, a mix of surprise and recognition, as though he had been waiting for those very words. He closed the book gently, set it aside, and stepped closer. "Every day," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "I've wondered every damn day." The silence that followed was not empty but full of years of hesitation, of moments stolen in laughter and lingering glances. I could hear my own pulse, rapid and relentless, demanding that I not back away now. "I'm tired of being scared, Ethan," I whispered. "I don't want to keep hiding." His hand reached for mine, tentative at first, then firm when I didn't pull away. "Then don't," he said simply. For the first time, it didn't feel like a fight against the world. It felt like the beginning of something we had both earned. The weeks that followed tested us in ways I had both feared and expected. My mother noticed the shift in my voice when I spoke about him, the way my smile reached places it hadn't in years. At first, she said nothing, but silence can be louder than words. When I finally told her the truth, sitting at the kitchen table with trembling hands and a voice that cracked midway through, she just looked at me for a long time. "You've always been different," she said finally, her tone neither cold nor warm, just tired. "I just hoped it wouldn't make life harder for you." "I'm not ashamed," I told her, more firmly than I expected. "Not anymore." Her eyes softened then, and though acceptance wasn't immediate, it wasn't rejection either. That was enough. The townspeople whispered, as I knew they would. Some avoided the store, others came in more often, perhaps curious to see if the rumors were true. Ethan, calm as always, faced them with a quiet dignity that disarmed their judgment. He didn't apologize for who he was, and slowly, I learned not to either. There were nights we lay on the roof of his apartment, the city lights flickering around us, his arm draped over my chest as if to shield me from the world. "It's never going to be easy," he murmured once. "Maybe not," I said, turning to face him. "But it's real, and that's enough." The climax of our story came in the most unexpected way. The bookstore was set to host a local reading event, something Ethan had been planning for months. It was meant to celebrate words, community, connection. What it became was a stage for truth. Halfway through the evening, with the store packed tighter than I had ever seen it, Ethan stepped forward. He didn't have notes. He didn't need them. "I built this place because I believed stories could change us," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "And I stand here today because one story, our story, changed me." A ripple of murmurs spread, but he kept going, eyes locked on mine. "I'm not going to apologize for who I love, because love is not a mistake. It's the most human thing we can do, and I am proud to love him." For a moment, the air hung heavy with uncertainty. Then applause began, hesitant at first, then growing, filling the room with something that felt like defiance and hope all at once. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't look away. When he reached for my hand in front of everyone, I held on as if letting go was never an option. Time did not erase the challenges, but it reshaped them. My mother grew gentler in her questions. My father, silent as ever, eventually showed up at the store one afternoon, buying a book he could have easily borrowed from the library. He said nothing, just handed me the money and nodded once. It was his way of saying he was still there. The whispers in town faded, replaced by new gossip, as they always do. Some still looked at us with disapproval, but many began to see us not as an oddity but simply as two men who loved each other. And in the end, that was all we wanted to be. One autumn evening, sitting at the counter as the last customer left, I turned to Ethan. The golden light from the street lamps filtered through the glass, casting shadows that felt like a soft curtain closing on an old play. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He shook his head, smiling that quiet, steady smile that had undone me from the very beginning. "Never. You were worth every risk." I leaned in, pressing my forehead against his, breathing in the scent of ink and paper and something uniquely him. "So were you." The bookstore had once been just a place of work, a backdrop to days that blurred together. Now, it was the heart of our story, the place where fear turned into courage, where silence gave way to truth, where love became something we no longer whispered but declared openly. And in that quiet, with the shelves surrounding us like old friends, I finally understood what happiness felt like. It wasn't loud or perfect. It was simple, steady, and real. Years later, when people asked about us, we would smile and say we met in a bookstore. And though that was true, the deeper truth was this: we didn't just meet there. We found ourselves there. We built a life from the pages of vulnerability and courage, inked with laughter, struggle, and love. And every time Ethan reached for my hand, whether in the crowded hum of a reading event or in the stillness of closing time, I held on, knowing that the hardest stories were always the ones worth telling. Because ours wasn't just a story, it was a promise. A promise that love, no matter how fragile, no matter how challenged, was always worth choosing. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.